Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. Today we continue our look at how American Girl dolls explain America, and this is our Addy deep dive episode. So, who is Addy? Well, in the fall of 1993, about 6 years after launching the line, American Girl doll introduced its fifth historical character representing the Civil War era, and Addy is the line's first black character, and a character who was born into slavery. This is how American Girl doll describes Addy's background. Addy Walker is an African-American girl who, at the start of her stories, is enslaved with her family on a North Carolina plantation during the last years of the Civil War. In fall of 1864, she escapes with her mother Ruth to the free North, and the two arrive and settle in Philadelphia. Addy spends much of her central series hoping to have her whole family reunited in freedom. So let's talk about Addy's arrival in 1993 and what she has meant over the years. For 17 years, Addy was the only black historical doll in the series. She was the only non-white doll up until 1998. One cultural critic wrote, quote, "Addy has been a polarizing figure, revered by many as an inspiring character and as an important educational tool, and criticized by others as a vehicle for wallowing in black suffering." It's good that we have that cultural critic here on the show, the one who wrote that. Aisha Harris is back from NPR, the new book, Wannabe Reckonings with the Pop Culture That Shapes Me. Aisha, thanks for doing this, and thanks for talking Addy.
Thank you. I've talked about her a lot in the last few years. It's crazy. I wrote this like 7 years ago, and it still resonates, which is fascinating.
Well, I think a lot of people had the same conflicted feelings that you did with Addy. And so let's quickly say hello to Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Let's dive in, Aisha. I mean, tell me, well, remind us, you got Addy as a kid.
Yes.
How much did you start to think about these deeper questions when you first got the doll?
I grew up in a house where I was always very aware of my race. My dad was a huge history buff and a huge, we need to make sure that you feel pride in yourself and you love yourself and what you look like. And so there were no white dolls allowed in our house. It was not a thing. He was very conscious of, the studies that had been done, the infamous studies about Black kids preferring white dolls and what that might do to their self-image and how they view race. So I was very aware. I also was in an environment growing up in school where most of my classmates were white. And I was, Black History Month, it was kind of one of those things where every time it came around, I was like, this feels uncomfortable. We're learning about slavery. I was ashamed of the fact that, my ancestors were likely enslaved. I say likely because we can only go back so far because of slavery, I guess, in our records. So I was very aware of it. And I remember my dad actually made me I think I was in first grade and I was 5 or 6. And I had gotten the doll and I'd gotten the books. And for Black History Month, or actually, I think it was for MLK's birthday. Anyway, I had to do we had an assembly and I had to give a speech. I was asked to give a speech and I wrote a speech about Addy and her journey. I remember my dad making me practice it over and over and over again, memorizing it. I was 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. And I think I did it. I memorized it. I think I only missed one paragraph or something or one line. But overall, that was my association with her. I was like, okay, she's the black doll. She was enslaved. And how did it make me feel? Conflicted, because I liked that her hair was similar to mine. And I liked that she looked like me. But I also did not like that she had been enslaved. And it was something that I struggled with a lot as a kid. And only as I grew older and really saw the value in what that doll was teaching me and other girls, that I began to appreciate her and appreciate what she meant. And also, once I started writing this piece and reporting on this piece, I realized, they put so much work and effort into this doll. This was not a haphazard attempt Like, yes, was it a cash grab? Sure, but it was also like serving an underserved market, and they were very intentional about how they did that. So I gained a newfound respect for this doll, and also for what Pleasant Rowland was able to do.
Aisha, I feel like we grew up in the same household. I too was not allowed to have a white doll. There were no white dolls in my household, even though I went to school in majority white town. I think I told this story too before in the podcast, where like I colored a picture of a princess and gave it to my mom with like blonde hair and blue eyes. And I was like, look, Mom, I made a princess. And she was like, it's ugly. And I was like, stunned.
The exact same thing happened to me. Well, I showed it to my dad and he didn't say that's ugly, but he was like, okay, so why did you color it like that?
Yes,
and then he was like, why isn't it brown?
My mom said, go back and make her brown and give her black hair. So I did. And then she was like, oh, she's beautiful. She looks like you, but that trying to instill in me pride facing this onslaught of white dolls, I understood what my mom was up against now and why Addy was so important, not just the doll herself, but the books itself as well. Because when I look back, other than like Jack Ezra Keats, there weren't a whole lot Black children that looked and acted like human beings, not like the Sambo characters that in the 1950s that were a common mainstay, but like regular ordinary children. And so I appreciated Addy for what they were trying to do. I was not in tune to like how deep and violent slavery was. I knew it was bad, but like it wasn't until I was an adult that I could look back with those kind of vibes. As a kid, I was just happy to have a doll.
Well, I think that it's such a powerful set of generational stories too, for a generation of Black men and women who grew up knowing the Clark doll study story, knowing how important it was to the decision in Brown v. Board, and that idea of representation and self-confidence and pride, all of those things tied together, makes a doll like Addy represent so much. And that's why I think it's so interesting, Aisha, the tension between a mother or father who might think of this as, I'm finally giving my daughter a doll that looks like her and that is representative and that can do all of these things. And then it's packaged together with a story that is really viscerally hard. I mean, historically accurate, right? Like the Addy story where she has to leave her little baby sister behind when she and her mother escape enslavement because the baby might cry, or where she's forced to eat a worm off of a tobacco plant by her enslaver. And these are just such tough, visceral stories that come packaged together with a doll that is about representation and pride. And that's a tough tension to work through.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
It's a lot to ask a doll. It's a lot, and you definitely get the sense that like you can't. So many people had to project onto Addy because she was the only one, and no one doll could fix everything.
Yeah.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
I didn't realize just how far back I think the tension went for having Black dolls. So there's this quote by Booker T. Washington where he advised Black parents to give their children dolls that have their own color and features, which will have the effect of instilling in Negro girls and Negro women a feeling of respect of their own race. And then Marcus Garvey, also a race leader of the same era, echoed the same thing, that mothers should give their children dolls that look like them.
Yeah.
And so, to be able to think about that, that's 100 years earlier, and almost 150 years earlier. We're thinking about how people are discussing play and what they play with, and that those dolls should be a reflection of them. It's just incredible to me.
Well, if you think about the fact that even back then, there were black dolls, but they were racist black dolls. They were the gollywogs. They were the dolls that looked like Mammy, like with the bright red lips and the handkerchief on the hair. Those were the things that those were the black dolls that were the option. And when you have that, it makes sense that people like Booker T. Washington at the same time were like, we need to get them dolls that actually look like them and don't look like caricatures of them.
Another moment in this history is, in 1968, Mattel tries to make a black Barbie, and it's basically just Barbie painted black. I mean, there's no kind of thinking beyond it. There's no, whatever. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
Well,
I had several of those.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Looked nothing like me, but,
I do want to cut to kind of what I think you learned after the fact, Aisha, but, this understanding of how Addy came together and the sort of thinking and research that went into bringing Addy together. There was actually kind of an advisory board of historians and scholars who were brought together, and they advised on a bunch of things. But, the thing that was surprising to me in there was that seemingly, and you may know this history better than I do, but seemingly the company kind of just wanted to create an African-American doll. And it was the advisory board that actually said, well, we think we should set this around the Civil War. As you started to research this, what did you discover about that moment?
Yeah, so I learned that this was the first time that they had actually put together a formal board. For the other dolls that came before Addy, they had outside counsel and historians weighing in, but nothing to this extent. They met over the course of, I think it was like 1 or 2 years, like every few months or so. And this board was like really impressive. It included Lonnie Bunch, who was at the time the curator of at the Smithsonian, and now he's like the head of the Black Smithsonian now. I always forget what it's officially called, but the one in the Blacksonian in DC. Cheryl Chisholm, who was a film producer, several historians, and also children's lit experts. So they were drawing from people who were very steeped in the history and also steeped in the understanding of how to teach this kind of history to children and how best to be sensitive about those things. Yeah, they were like, they debated for a little bit about what era to put her in, and then they were like, well, we have to start with slavery. Like, you can't just skip over all of that. And I think they were also thinking, like, eventually we'll get to the other, and it took way too long for them to eventually get to other eras. But, they were like, this is where we have to start, and this is what we're gonna do. And the details that I learned about how everything, like from the books, they had input, like Connie Porter wrote the books. They advised on that. And they also advised on the doll itself, her hair, like how kinky or how straight it would be. One of the people on the board actually quoted to me, they're like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but she said, we could make her hair straighter, but if we do, then we have to get into why it's straighter.
Oh, gosh.
I.e. the sexual assault, rape of Black enslaved women by their owners. So they pushed hard for that. They pushed hard for her hair to not be the quote unquote manageable, as some people like to say, which is, obviously a very anti-Black way of describing Black hair. And also they like the gap in her teeth, which I was really fascinated to learn. That was also intentional. They were like, this is a common trait of people from where she might have come from in Africa, so we should have the gap in her teeth. So when you learn how much due diligence they took to put this doll together, and it wasn't all smooth, there was some back and forth and compromise, but like the fact that they were able to make this at all and have it come out in a way that was sort of true to what historians understood about that era and understood about the people where they were coming from, it's just really, really I don't know. Yeah. It's great. It's kind of a nice slice of history.
It took 3 years.
Yeah.
3 years to make the doll. That's no small amount of time for one doll.
Yeah.
That's wild to me too.
And just the amount of care that went into it.
I get what you say. You're like, now you're a little bit more defensive of it. like for a doll, I don't want this doll, and now it's like, oh, this doll, like it holds a lot.
Well, I have a question about Addy, but actually on that phenomenon, Kellie, I'm glad you brought that up, because as you were describing kind of how at first, when you first encountered this doll, you felt a little conflicted, or you recognized there was something going on, and then in retrospect, you've gone back and looked and sort of come to understand it. As a cultural critic, like how often does that happen? Because it usually feels to me like it's on the revisit that things get more complicated or more sketchy or problematic, and this feels like maybe a little bit of an inversion.
Yeah, this is rare for me. Usually, it's like, oh man, we've come a long way, or we like to think we've come a long way since then. No, this is definitely very rare, and it's interesting because every few months or so, someone on Twitter will be like, I can't believe they're older now, but they're like, I can't believe this was all we had was a slave doll. And then like that tweet goes viral, and then I'm just like, okay, but here's this thing I wrote where I explained that it was like way more complicated than that. And also, this wasn't, I think a lot of people still think that this was just a white company putting out this black doll about slavery. And yes, it was a white-owned company, and most of the people who worked there full-time at that time were white. But they had an entire advisory board, and they were all black. They knew their stuff. They were qualified, and we can't just dismiss things out of hand that we don't necessarily know the origin of. And it's easy for, I do it all the time too, and then I have to be like, oh, wait, maybe I should have not gone so hard against this or gone so hard for this thing.
Can I just say, if Mattel or Lego wants to call me and put me on your advisory board for the next black doll, like that seems like the funnest. I mean, yes, there's a lot that goes into it, but it would seem so much fun to me to be able to, like, I don't know, design and think about hair texture or clothing or like skin tone, like, I get that's definitely hard, arduous work, but there's something also really gratifying about putting together a doll that will go into the arms of millions of little girls. Like, that's cool.
Kellie, I want you to do like a well-armed black abolitionist girl.
Yes! Well, when you say, it's so funny because remember when it came to Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill and people were like, does she have a bandana on? Does she not have a bandana on? Is she older? Is this the older Harriet Tubman or younger Harriet Tubman? I mean, like all of the things that go into just putting her face on money, and then like, no, you can't put her on money because she was money. She was worth something. Like thinking about enslaved people as capital, like all of those bigger existential questions. Yeah. It's not easy. It's not easy at all.
Aisha, I do get the amount of thought that went into this. Really helps kind of paint a picture to this story. But to return to something we've hinted at a few times about kind of how much can a kid just be a kid? It's one thing that strikes me, right? If you go to the American Girl Doll website and you read the bios of all of these kids, Addy's bio, the first 5 paragraphs are about enslavement, her biography, what happens to her family, etc. And then, literally in the at the 5th paragraph, it says, Addy is a brave, loving, thoughtful, and kind child. Right? It's the first time there's like a personality there, as opposed to just a biography.
They should start with that.
Whereas other dolls, right? We read one in the last episode. The very first thing you hear is like, this is a mischievous, fun-loving kid who happens to live in this era. And just even in that kind of, you see some of those hints of what we were discussing. I'm just curious, if you can just return to some of those thoughts about whether a kid just gets to be a kid.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I have an appreciation for the doll, I think that, and what went into making it, there are ways that it's marketed that maybe could leave something to be desired. I think the thing is like, and this is partially as a kid and as like an adult who maybe doesn't always remember these things, and also could be the way that she's been marketed, we forget that she's only enslaved for the first book. And then the rest of the books, she's escaped and she's living in Philadelphia. So, I mean, that's just a small sliver out of 6 books, or what used to be 6 books. Now they've like condensed them into 2 books or 3. I don't know. They've changed their whole like format for the historical.
Ron DeSantis is trying to turn it into 1 paragraph. But
yeah. So, but like that's just a small part of it, and the rest of it is about her, living as a free Black girl. But I think that overshadows it in a way, just because the idea of slavery, it just looms so large. And also, maybe the American Girl Company could do better to like explain that that's not just the only part of her life. Like, she's got other things. She's got other interests. I think Felicity loved horses. It's like, okay, so what does Addy love? Like, put that in the summary.
Even as someone who didn't read the books and didn't have an American Girl doll, I knew Felicity loved horses. So I think
yes.
Wow.
That was like her. That's the only thing I remember about Felicity. It was like she loved horses.
People who love horses, that's kind of their personality.
That is their entire personality.
Yeah, I think she was my least favorite part because I was like, who cares? Yeah.
So we should say, as we wrap up, there is now Melody Ellison, who's a Motown singer, and Cecily Ray, a black girl living in New Orleans in the 1850s. Just a couple years ago, or just last year, American Girl doll introduced Claudine Wells, who was from the Harlem Renaissance, which I think re-sparked a lot of these conversations around Addy. As we said, there's dozens of dolls now representing kind of all different eras. And then there's even, I have to mention this, but there's even the like made-up American Girl doll. So did you see the American Girl Karen that people were memeing on Twitter for a while? And they made like an American Girl doll Karen who wore like a tracksuit and like called the manager. And, like, it was very funny.
Poor Karens everywhere.
I know.
I know.
I have an aunt named Karen, and I wonder how she feels about it because she's not white.
It's a common name across racial lines.
It really
and
is.
It has gotten a bad break. Same with Becky. It's really bad. It's bad. But I'm glad that they have more dolls. I'm glad they have more representation. There are endless amount of stories to tell, countless stories. Where everyone can get buy-in.
And capitalism favors new models, so...
Yes, it does.
American Girl doll, if you're listening, we've done 400 plus episodes of this show of all sorts of interesting stories from different eras. We would happily hand over a few of them to you if you want to create your next line. All right, as we go, final word. Aisha, you do have a new book coming out, Wannabe, Reckonings with the Pop Culture That Shapes Me. The American Girl doll essay is not in this collection, is that right? But
no, these are all original. Yeah, they're all original essays. I do touch a little bit on the black dolls and how my parents were very anti-white doll in the house. It's connected, though, to more so a piece I wrote even before this one, many years ago, about Santa Claus and why he should be a penguin instead of a old white man. And then, people like Meg and Kellie got really upset about that. But yes, it's a collection of original essays. I touch on that. And it's really about me sort of exploring how my love of pop culture has informed the way I view myself and informed the way I view other people. And I talk about my name. In fact, Kellie, before they were recording, you started singing Aisha to me. Well, that is in my book. I talk about how often that has happened to me.
It's so fun to sing. I'm sorry.
It is. And don't worry. It's okay. I mean, there are better songs than that one, but it's fine. And yeah, I also hope that it gets people to also think about how pop culture shapes their own lives, and especially when it comes to anyone who's chronically online and how we interact with people who talk about things that we enjoy, like any pop star or movie that you were uber fan of, like maybe be a little bit less angsty about it online. So yeah, there's
not a chance.
So I think there's a lot there for millennials like myself. I think there's also plenty of things for younger folks who might be interested in things that us old millennials are into. But yes, it's out June 13th, and you can pre-order it now, or if you're listening to this after it's already come out, you can buy it. I also did the audiobook.
Great.
Check out the audiobook if you want to hear me do my best attempt at a Dave Chappelle impression. So that'll be fun.
We want to hear that. Great. And we'll put a link for what it's worth in our little show description. But Aisha Harris, thank you so much for doing this. And I can't tell you how long we've been wanting to do American Girl doll, and you were the number one obvious guest to have on. So thank you so much for doing this.
It was an honor. Thank you.
Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.
From